Okay, let's unpack this. If you ask the average person what they think of when they hear the phrase the Ten Commandments, you usually get, well, a pretty standard set of reactions.
Right, yeah. It's either a dusky piece of ancient history or it's this, suffocating list of thou shalt nots handed down by a dictator in the sky to keep humanity from having any fun.
Exactly. It feels like a massive heavy chain. But what if we've been reading this entirely wrong? For today's deep dive, we are pulling together a really fascinating stack of materials.
We've got everything from historical theological frameworks like Dr. Constable's notes and John Calvin to ancient Near Eastern archaeology.
Yeah, and even a modern atheist contest featured on CNN, plus the tragic history of a British ocean liner. I mean, it is a wide-ranging
It
stack.
really is.
And our mission here is to strip away centuries of cultural baggage. We want to look at how this ancient text was actually designed to function as a transitional model moving humanity from a state of visceral fear into, well, a profound relationship.
And to do that, we actually have to start before the rules even begin. Because the context surrounding the rules fundamentally changes what the rules actually are.
Right.
When you look at the text in the book of Exodus, human nature usually draws our eyes straight to the behavioral demands. But before a single moral imperative is given at Mount Sinai, the encounter opens with a definitive foundational statement.
It's a huge detail most people just skip right over.
Yeah, God says, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery.
The rescue happens first.
Yeah.
I mean, the Israelites were already saved, already liberated from generations of slavery before the very first commandment was ever spoken.
Which turns a lot of modern assumptions completely upside down. The foundational premise of this text is that God is speaking to a people who are already his.
I'm so glad we are starting here because my own default mindset, and I think a lot of people fall into this trap, is what we could call the ladder to heaven illusion.
Oh, yeah. The cosmic ladder.
Exactly. We tend to view religious or moral rules as this ladder. The assumption is that if I just climb high enough, if I behave well enough and check all the moral boxes, well, then I will earn my rescue. Then I will be loved.
But the text aggressively rejects that order of operations. The law was never designed to be a prerequisite for being saved. It was given as a pattern of life for people who were, already rescued.
In diving into our sources, there is an incredible historical analogy that brings this concept to life, and it's centered around the sinking of the RMS Lusitania back in 1915.
Such a tragic event.
It really was. It was a British ocean liner struck by a torpedo, and it sank in a devastating 18 minutes. Nearly 1,200 passengers died. But there is a specific haunting detail recorded by a survivor named Charles Laureate. He was a bookseller from Boston.
Right, and what he saw as the ship was going down is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, Laureate noticed that the ship was actually equipped with modern, effective body life jackets. But the passengers rushing past him in a panic, they were dying because they were wearing them incorrectly.
They had the right equipment, but were applying it fatally.
Yes, they were putting the life jackets on, but in the chaos, they weren't tying the lower straps around their waists. So when they hit the water, the intense buoyancy of the cork around their shoulders pushed the jackets up.
Flipping the passengers completely upside down.
Right. Their faces were forced under the water by the very device meant to save them. And why did this happen? Because almost no one had stopped to read the neat little instruction placards posted by the designer all over the ship.
That captures the essence of the biblical law perfectly. When you try to use a life-saving device without the instructions of the designer, it becomes destructive.
It totally backfired.
Exactly. The apologist Josh McDowell summarized this beautifully in one of our sources. He said, rules without relationship will always lead to rebellion.
Wow.
Yeah. The rules at Sinai aren't arbitrary tests to see if the Israelites are worthy of being saved. They are the manufacturer's life-preserver instructions for how to survive in freedom.
But, humans naturally bristle at being told what to do. Even if it's for our own survival, we constantly try to rewrite the instructions. We look for loopholes.
We really do.
Which takes us into the actual structure of how these specific rules were written, because they're incredibly unique for the ancient world.
They are. I mean, the Israelites eventually accumulated over 600 laws, and the surrounding ancient Near Eastern cultures had massive, complex legal codes, too. But these specific 10 words, the Decalogue, they stand apart mechanically.
Oh, so?
Well, they are categorized as apodictic laws.
Meaning they use absolute categorical verbs like thou shalt not, period. There are no
Well,
qualifiers.
exactly. When you look at other ancient texts like the famous Code of Hammurabi, you mostly find casuistic laws.
Yeah,
These are circumstantial, like if a man's ox gores his neighbor, then he must pay a certain fine.
which immediately invites a lawyer into the room. If a law starts with if, someone is going to say, well, what if the ox was provoked? What if the neighbor was trespassing?
Right, it creates a society built on navigating loopholes.
But an apodictic law, you shall not murder, that just drops an anvil on the loophole. It establishes an absolute boundary.
It forces equality, too. An absolute boundary doesn't care if you are a wealthy merchant or a peasant. And speaking of how these laws were delivered, we need to correct a massive visual misconception from our sources.
Oh, the tablets. Yes, we all have that image cemented in our brains by pop culture, right? Moses coming down the mountain holding 2 stone tablets.
Charlton Heston, dramatic music.
Holding 1 tablet with the first 5 rules and the second tablet with the remaining 5.
Right, but the archaeological reality of the ancient Near East suggests that image is just a myth.
Wait, really?
Yeah. When a suzerain vassal treaty was finalized, which is a legally binding covenant between a sovereign ruler and a subject people, it was customary to make duplicate copies of the exact same document.
So it wasn't a split list. Each stone tablet likely contained all 10 commandments.
That is the consensus. One copy was traditionally placed in the temple of the sovereign's god, and the other in the temple of the vassal. It was a formal, mutual contract of relationship. You keep your copy, I keep mine.
Okay, if this is a binding contract, it begs the question, what happens if we just tear up the ancient contract and try to write a new one?
That's a very modern impulse.
It is. And one of our sources is this fascinating CNN report covering a contest held by a prominent atheist group. They actually offered a $10,000 prize to crowdsource modern alternatives to the 10 Commandments. They called it the 10 non-commandments.
It's a really fascinating sociological pivot. When you remove the divine sovereign from the contract, what do humans replace the rules with?
Well, the winning list was highly rational. Just to share a few of their top non-commandments impartially, they prioritized relying on the scientific method to understand the natural world. They included recognizing that every person has the right to control their own body. Another winner was being open-minded and willing to alter your beliefs with new evidence. And of course, striving to leave the world a better place than you found it.
Very pragmatic.
Yeah, they explicitly built a framework stating that a deity is not necessary to live a meaningful ethical life.
Looking at those 2 lists side by side reveals the fundamental philosophical divergence between the modern Enlightenment worldview and the biblical worldview.
How so?
Well, the atheist list places the ultimate locus of authority entirely within human rationality and self-governance. It assumes humanity, given the right scientific and ethical tools, can successfully steer the ship.
While the biblical text operates on the premise that internal human authority is fundamentally flawed.
Yes, the biblical argument is that humans are incapable of being their own supreme authority without eventually exploiting someone else to serve their ego. Therefore, ethics must be anchored to something external and higher than humanity.
Which explains the first rule.
Exactly. That is why the very first commandment is not about being a good neighbor. It is, you shall have no other gods before me.
Which honestly feels like a direct challenge to you, the listener, right now. Even if you consider yourself highly rational, even if you never bow down to a literal golden statue, the human heart is a factory for idols.
It really is.
The theologian J.I. Packer points out in our sources that we simply replace ancient deities with modern trinities. We worship things like sex, shekels, and stomach. Or we pledge our ultimate allegiance to football, the firm, and the family.
It's easy to see how money or a career can become idols, but including family in that list often catches people off guard.
I was definitely caught off guard by that one. I mean, how does something objectively good like your family become a destructive idol?
Well, an idol is simply a good thing that has been elevated into an ultimate thing. When the gift becomes more important than the creator, it warps your morality.
Okay, that makes sense.
If your family is your absolute god, you will easily justify destroying someone else's career, or embezzling money, or lying, as long as it benefits your family. The ultimate allegiance dictates the behavior.
Wow. The transition from what we worship to how we behave on a daily basis brings us to one of the most illuminating analogies in our sources, the train tracks.
I love this analogy.
We tend to look at a commandment like, you shall not murder, and just check a box. Great, I haven't killed anyone today, I'm a good person. But the sources argue these rules are more like train tracks. Murder is just the final catastrophic station at the end of a long track called conflict.
You don't just instantly arrive at that final station. You travel along the track for miles.
Right, you pass through the station of annoyance, then the station of verbal abuse, then contempt, dehumanization, and finally hatred. The law isn't just telling you to avoid the final station, it's telling you to get off the track entirely.
The New Testament later expands on this exact trajectory. The physical act of adultery or theft is the extreme manifestation of a mindset that was tolerated long before the action occurred. Stealing is a perfect example.
Because stealing isn't just robbing a bank, it is an internal mindset of taking much while giving little.
Exactly.
The sources apply this to modern life so well. Stealing is wage theft. It is an employer cutting corners on safety to save a buck. It is an employee wasting company time, or someone plagiarizing a colleague's idea. It's a massive track.
And this relentless demand for internal purity, this idea that you cannot hide behind loopholes, sets up a profound tension in the text. Because immediately after laying out these massive moral pillars, the book of Exodus pivots to incredibly specific instructions on how the Israelites are supposed to build altars to worship this God.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is the part of the text that really threw me. God tells them the altar must be made of simple earth or uncut stone.
Yeah.
And no steps are allowed. Why dirt? I mean, humans love to build magnificent carved stone cathedrals to honor the divine. Aren't beautiful carved stone churches a good thing? Why is an intricate altar suddenly a problem?
To decode that, we have to look at the economic reality of the surrounding Canaanite culture. In ancient Near Eastern religions, highly dressed, carved stones and towering altars weren't just decorative, they functioned as tax devices.
Tax devices?
Yes. The intricate altars were controlled by an elite priestly class who used them to funnel the agricultural wealth of the peasant class into their own pockets.
Wait, so demanding an uncut stone like a rock you just found on the ground was essentially an anti-monopoly measure for ancient religion?
It was a massive decentralization of power. Anyone could gather uncut stones. It thwarted political hierarchy and financial exploitation in the name of religion.
That is fascinating.
But there is a second psychological layer. Think about the human ego. When we carve a magnificent monument, we stand back and say, "Look at what I made." Dressed stones make worship about human achievement. True worship is supposed to be about the creator, not the creation putting its own skills on display.
Okay, so that explains the uncut stones. But what about the prohibition against having steps up to the altar?
The text explicitly states it is so your nakedness will not be exposed. Now, some ancient cults performed rituals naked, but metaphorically, steps elevate the human being. They put the person performing the ritual on a stage above everyone else.
Ah, I see.
The biblical model dictates that approaching the divine requires total relinquishment, not self-elevation.
Stripping away our achievements, our wealth-gathering mechanisms, and our self-elevation is incredibly vulnerable. It makes perfect sense, then, that the immediate reaction of the Israelites to all of this isn't joy. It is absolute terror.
Yeah, faced with the thunder, the fire, and the reality of a God who demands internal purity, the people just back away from the mountain. They tell Moses, "You speak to us, but do not let God speak to us lest we die."
Why is that the default human reaction, though? If these rules are the life preserver instructions meant for our good, why does encountering the sanctifier make us want to run and hide?
The sources trace the psychological origin of this fear all the way back to Genesis 3, the narrative of the fall. When sin entered the human experience, vulnerability and shame followed immediately. Adam and Eve hid in the garden.
Right.
At Sinai, that same defensive fear is operating. The Israelites loved the benefits of God the Liberator, the one who smashed the Egyptian armies, but they wanted distance from God the Sanctifier.
Because getting close to the sanctifier requires the death of the ego. It means you can no longer be the ultimate authority in your own life, which is terrifying. They wanted the freedom of the rescue without the transformation of the relationship.
Exactly. And Moses responds to their panic with a profound paradox. He tells the trembling crowd, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you."
Don't fear so that you can fear. It sounds like a riddle until you break down the two different types of fear.
Right.
Our sources use the analogy of a kid climbing a tall tree. If the child climbs too high, a healthy fear kicks in. That fear isn't a phobia. It is a vital caution that keeps them from falling to their death.
Moses is attempting to orchestrate a massive psychological evolution for the Israelites. He needs them to move away from the visceral, cowering terror of a slave waiting to be beaten by a master and transition into a cognitive, life-giving reverence.
That's a huge shift.
It is the difference between being afraid of an abuser and standing in awe of a powerful ocean. One makes you hide, the other makes you realize your proper place in the universe and keeps you safe.
So how do we interact with this today? I mean, we aren't standing at the base of a smoking mountain in the desert. To synthesize how this ancient text functions for a modern reader, our sources turn to the framework developed by the theologian John Calvin. It's known as the threefold use of the law.
Yes, and the first use is that the law acts as a mirror.
Mirror.
When you hold up the deep internal demands of the Decalogue, especially when you view them as those train tracks we discussed, it reflects the perfect righteousness of the divine. But simultaneously, it reflects our own deep flaws.
Which goes right back to the ladder illusion.
Exactly. The mirror proves that we cannot climb the ladder to heaven on our own merits. It drives us to realize our need for grace.
Okay, but if the first use is a mirror for the individual, highlighting our personal flaws, it seems like society would completely collapse if everyone was just constantly failing. There has to be a structural application.
There is. Calvin identified the second use as a restraint. Even for individuals who have zero interest in spirituality or grace, the law curbs evil through the dread of consequence.
Like a societal speed limit.
Precisely. It provides a necessary baseline of public morality that restrains the worst impulses of humanity and keeps civilization from descending into total chaos.
Which leaves the third use. If the law is a mirror that shows us our need for grace, and a restraint that keeps society functioning, what is the final step?
The third use is as a guide. For those who have looked in the mirror and accepted the rescue, the law transforms. It is no longer a burden or a threat. It becomes a lamp.
A lamp to light the way.
Right. It reveals what is genuinely pleasing to the rescuer. It becomes the blueprint for how to live out the relationship.
Which brings us to an incredible summary point. When Jesus was later asked to distill the entirety of these laws and the hundreds of subsequent rules, he didn't offer a dense theological dissertation. He summarized the whole architecture into a single word: love.
Love God with everything you have, and love your neighbor as yourself.
The logic is airtight. If you truly love God, you will not build idols or elevate your ego.
And if you truly love your neighbor, you won't travel down the train tracks of murder, theft, or deceit. Love is the ultimate fulfillment of the boundary.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does this all mean for you? Whether you are commuting, washing dishes, or prepping for your next meeting. The challenge is to audit the boundaries in your own life. Are you viewing them as suffocating restrictions tying you down? Or can you shift your paradigm to see them as the life preserver instructions, the actual architecture of true freedom?
And to help you audit those boundaries, there is one final lingering detail hidden in the structure of the Ten Commandments to take with you today.
Well, this is a good one.
The first 9 commandments deal with visible external actions or spoken words. You can be witnessed stealing or committing perjury or honoring your parents. But the 10th commandment is entirely invisible.
You shall not covet.
It happens entirely inside the mind. No human court, ancient or modern, can arrest you for secretly coveting your neighbor's life or their success or their property. It is an undetectable internal desire.
But it changes everything.
It serves as the anchor of the entire Decalogue. So the question to ponder is this: if coveting is the secret, invisible root that eventually grows into all the other broken rules, well, actually, I shouldn't say it like that. If it's the root of everything else, how much of your visible behavior right now is actually just a symptom of the invisible desires hiding in your mind?